Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I started this channel with the vain and distant hope that I would one day be thought of as a Trails guy on the internet. That when people thought Trails, they would think Brandon, along with people like the Kaseki Nut and others that have done a lot to boost the series in the West. But I understand I may need to work my way up to Trails guy status. No idea when that'll happen. But in the meantime, I think I need to get the ball rolling with more Trails content. And to start that off, I want to actually sit down and tell you all why I think each game in the Trails series is great. Actually, I wrote sit down in my script, but I'm gonna keep standing. I prefer to stand. At the very end of 2023, I decided I would do a complete and epic playthrough of all the Trails games, leading up to the release of Trails Through Daybreak this summer. For me, replaying helps me get the most insight in each new chapter when it comes out, since Falcom are experts at subtle references. I just love it when they drop in a minor character from a previous arc into a side quest in the arc you're playing now. There's no requirement to have the knowledge that this character was from a previous arc. The first time I did Anton's side quest in Trails from Zero, I had completely forgotten who he was in Trails in the Sky, just as one example. But knowing the character's histories makes everything that much more vibrant. So step one of this big 2024 Trails journey is going to be reviewing each of the games released thus far. That leads us to The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky FC did its best to sneak under the radar. A name like Legend of Heroes is the equivalent of wearing a shirt that matches the wallpaper. Who's gonna notice a game as bland sounding as that? Though admittedly, Trails in the Sky is a bit more evocative, as if the aforementioned wallpaper shirt wearer put on a fun party hat. Now, if the only thing that comes to mind when you hear Trails in the Sky is chemtrails, then get off the internet, it's hurting you. For the rest of you, if you're not already convinced that Trails is worth your time, stick around and give me a chance to tell you why it is. Trails in the Sky FC, that stands for First Chapter, by the way. But anyway, it stars Estelle Bright. And yes, her name means bright star, there's nothing I can do about that. Japanese creators just seem to like naming their characters after really obvious character traits. But truly, Estelle is one of the most upbeat and optimistic characters in JRPGs, and as a main character, she is a breath of fresh air in a room otherwise filled with a bunch of amnesiac dudes who are fated to kill God and save the world. Estelle and her adopted brother Joshua both want to follow in their dad's footsteps and become bracers, which are essentially security for hire freelancers who prioritize the safety and well-being of the populace. Because they're apolitical in nature, they're able to operate almost everywhere in the world, which gives us our inciting incident. On the very day that Estelle and Joshua become fledgling bracers, their father is called away on an international mission, leaving them to undertake their first tasks alone. What follows is a trip on foot around the country of Liberl, as Estelle and Joshua visit each of the major cities and quite a few smaller villages as well, taking on jobs as they're presented with them, all while simultaneously seeming to be at the epicenter of every major episode of political strife and intrigue happening in the nation. From finding lost rings to thwarting a planned coup, these kids do it all. This is an extremely pared down summary since it doesn't cover everything that happens over the course of Trails in the Sky FC, nor does it even touch on the numerous characters you meet and team up with along the way. We'll get to them in a bit. But I don't want to describe any more of the overall story, because here's the thing. The biggest hurdle that most people have to overcome if they want to get into the Trails series is the story of Trails in the Sky FC. Now wait, Trails fans, before you murder me, hear me out. I love the story of Trails in the Sky FC. Even on my first playthrough, I was so enchanted by the characters and the world and the lore that I knew I was in it for the long haul, regardless of where the series went next. But I know that for a lot of people, the pacing of Trails in the Sky FC turns them off. I wouldn't describe it as slow, exactly. It's deliberately paced, each chapter feeling like an episode of a drama, where the plot escalates and resolves within each region, while threads are weaved between the chapters that end up forming the overall narrative, which comes together at the end. But this is so different from most RPGs like it that it can be confusing for some people. Is this it? They might be saying. Is each Trails game just a bunch of one-off vignettes that barely connect and don't really matter to each other? The answer to that is wholeheartedly no. And I think it's necessary to adjust your thinking about RPGs a bit to fully appreciate what Trails is doing. If you'll allow me to use an example outside of video games, it reminds me a lot of the show Gravity Falls. Have you seen that? It's this great piece of fiction, super funny, super weird, and the way it's set up is fairly unusual for a TV show. It's only 2 seasons long, and the first season is very Monster of the Week style, with individual episodes that don't overtly connect to each other, other than featuring the same characters in the world. The second season, on the other hand, steers hard into a more long-form narrative style of storytelling. Because of the way its first season was handled, we got a chance to get to know all the main characters and their world in a way that was still fun and entertaining. And so when the second season began, they were able to hit the ground running without having to spend any time setting things up for us. It's brilliant, and I can't think of too many pieces of fiction that do this, other than Gravity Falls. And Trails. See, each time a new arc begins in the Trails series, there's always let's call it an introductory game. Sky FC, Zero, Trails of Cold Steel 1, these games front-load character development and world building, and so they might feel strictly episodic in nature. However, this is all to set up the next game, which uses that foundation of characters and world to go hard on story and action and big revelations. It does require a bit of patience and a willingness to go along for the ride, to trust that there is a plan here and that it will all be revealed in due time. If you can make that kind of commitment, Sky FC is more than willing to pay you back tenfold. So Trails in the Sky FC is foundational. It teaches you about the characters and the world, and it gives you all the basics of how most of the Trails games are going to play too. Speaking of playing, I want to talk a bit about the gameplay because this is a review, and some people do care about that, I've learned. Not everyone is solely a story hound like me. Battles in Sky FC are turn-based, with the turn order displayed at all times on the left side of the screen. Your characters and the enemies are free to move around the arena within their available move distance, and you can attack any enemy in range. Obviously, your range is going to differ depending on whether you use something short, like a dagger, or something long range, like a gun. Now, because you're not tied to a certain spot on the battle screen like in an old school Final Fantasy, or pretty much all old school RPGs for that matter, well, that means that positioning is very important. Easily as important as it is in something like Ogre Battle or Final Fantasy Tactics. Spells might target an individual monster, or they might target a monster and the area surrounding it. Or they might target an area on the map only, meaning that enemies would have a chance to move out of that area and avoid the attack. And naturally, you have the same options as well. It's actually pretty easy to grasp once you give it a shot. The magic system, I should say, is certainly one of the most complicated I've seen in a game. Your list of available spells depends on which quartz you put in your orbments. Orbments are part of the overall Trails story in that they're pieces of technology that have recently been developed and started a sort of industrial revolution for what used to be a more or less medieval society just a generation or two before. Different combinations of the various colors of quartz connected to each other in your orbment bring about different types of spells. And each quartz has a different value associated to it, and I've lost you already, haven't I? Even Trails veterans are starting to nod off. Look, I'll admit, I've never fully understood the nuances of the magic system, but it's fine. You'll be fine not fully understanding it, believe me. Because if you ever do find yourself struggling against a particularly nasty boss, the games allow you to retry the battle on a lower difficulty. This is fantastic for when you're eager to move on, but don't want to permanently lower the difficulty for the rest of the game. Other quality of life features are in here as well, like the option to speed up gameplay. I mean, obviously the ideal situation would be that the games wouldn't need to be sped up, that the normal speed would just feel right. But keep in mind, Sky FC is a pretty old game at this point. It came out in 2004 initially. It's 20 this year. It can buy cigarettes and die for its country. It can't drink or rent a car yet, but that's coming. So take full advantage of turbo mode because playing without it feels like slogging through swamp water with a full backpack. Your party members are as varied as they are interesting, which begins a long series tradition of just having the best casts in each new entry. Aside from Estelle and Joshua, you have Shara, their mentor and a practitioner of a whip fu, a thing I just made up. I just mean she uses a whip, I could have just said that. There's also Olivier, a mysterious traveling bard from a foreign country who serves primarily as a comic relief, at least until you start to get a peek into his backstory. Also, he just straight up has a gun. He shoots things. Then there's Agate, a surly dude with a big sword and a tragic past, who probably would have been the main character if this were a run-of-the-mill RPG. Can't forget Chloe, who's an upper-crust student at a private academy and an expert fencer. And Tita, the 12-year-old inventor who doesn't just have a gun, but in fact has the biggest of guns. And last but not least, Zin, who is large and does martial arts. There's more to him than that, of course, but for our purposes, large and does martial arts will suffice. These characters will join up with you for a while as you go about the game, and they'll leave at certain points too, at least until the end when they all become available to you. It's a great way to introduce each character and give them time to shine with Estelle and Joshua without previous characters' personalities overwhelming anyone. Trails in the Sky FC is charming and sweet and funny, and it sets up one of the best stories in modern media. Its flaws aren't insurmountable, and its deliberate pace is actually one of its strengths if you view it through the right lens. It can be intimidating starting a series of this size. I understand that completely. But if you never take the plunge, you'll never know what you might have been missing. So, what do you think? Is that a decently convincing argument to check out Sky FC? Let me know if I convinced you down in the comments. If you're already a Trails fan, please do me a favor and leave your passionate pitches for why everyone should at least give this game a try down below as well. And if you consider liking the video, it would help me out a ton. And please make sure to subscribe so you can catch all the Trails content I'm gonna be putting out this year, and all the other stuff I'm doing too. I'm not just like a Trails guy or something. Anyway, until next time, bye.